Welcome back to the greatest Tanya share of all time, and today we're going to be continuing on the idea of the person who brings down a very problematic soul for his son. What did we have last year? We talked about the whole point of the Pek is how the Jewish soul is a part of God from above, literally. It's all from Hashem, nothing got to do with you. If it was something that you could affect or handle, then it wouldn't be really godly. God's not something you can affect or handle. But then we began saying how, no. It depends if the father and mother act properly at the time of the conceiving the child, that affects the child. That's what it says in the Zohar. So Yehuda, you were the carbon yesterday. Yehuda likes to learn Zohar every night. He learns in the Zohar that if a mother and father behave properly, they draw down a holy soul for their child. And if not, they draw down an impure, lower level soul, not impure, lower level. So if a person can have an effect on the soul of their child, it's not so godly after all. It's kind of human. It's within our realm. So the answer we're going to find out today. The answer is as follows. You ready? It doesn't mean the actual soul. Rather, we're going to get introduced today to something new called the levush. What's the levush? Literally meaning a garment. We explained how there's a godly soul and an animal soul in every person. And we talked about how deep within the animal soul is where the godly soul resides. So if a person acts in a very shallow manner and expresses their outer self, they're expressing the animal soul. If they express themselves deeper, if they dig deep, they can find their godly soul within themselves. Here's the problem. How can a godly soul or an animal soul or any type of soul interact with the body? If a body is purely physical and a soul is purely spiritual, there should be an infinite disconnect. So for this, we have to have a levush. A levush means a garment. It's just like a person has to dress a certain way. You have to dress nicely in order to get into the press conference in the White House, and you have to dress really cool to go out to the skate park with your friends. The soul has to dress itself up to make itself public, to bring itself into the body. Because the body is fully physical and the soul is fully spiritual, you have a garment. That's an in-between. It's something that is partially spiritual, but it's the physical side of the spiritual. Just like the body and the soul are two different realms, you could say that the levush is the body of the soul. Or you could say it's the soul of the body. But it's a spiritual component that's physical enough to interact with the body, and that's the middleman. Now, what does this thing do? It also has another name, the nefesh hasichlis. And this third soul, that barely gets mentioned in Tanya, because it's really not so important to our conversation, is really, today, going to be the most important thing, because everyone who ever learned Tanya has the same question. And Hillel, for sure, I'm surprised Hillel hasn't asked me this question yet. How could it be that I have a godly soul or an animal soul, and I have to choose which one to listen to? Who am I? If I am my soul, I'm not just a body, I'm not just a chunk of meat and bones. If I am my soul, and my godly soul gives me good ideas, the animal soul gives me bad ideas, and I have to choose, who is the I who chooses? Am I the animal soul, or am I the godly soul? So really, we explained previously, it's not like two different sides. It's two sides within the same person. It's all part of you. But the decision would be made by the nefesh hasichlis, the intelligent soul, the soul of thinking. This is the most base level, the behind the scenes of the body. Just like the body has a brain that has the ability. So the nefesh hasichlis is the in-between. The nefesh hasichlis is what decides between, are you going to listen to the Yetzer Torah or the Yetzer Hara? And this barely gets mentioned in Tanya, but it's very, very important to understand for today. So what does it mean in the Zohar that the parents' actions decide the level of their child? It means the way the parents act decides what type of a levush the child will have. They create, just like the parents create the body. And if the parents are doing drugs while they're having a child, the child might be deformed. It's very sad. I once met a lady who was she had a baby. I was on America's shluchah. So this lady was a shluchah. Her baby was a preemie. It was born very early, so it had to be in the NICU, in the hospital. And there was a bunch of babies there that cried nonstop, screaming uncontrollably. She asked the nurse, what's going on with these babies? She said, these babies, the mothers, were drug addicts. So the babies are born addicted to the drugs.
And if you don't give the babies the drugs, they won't be able to handle it. They need it in their bloodstream. So they have to wean the babies off. The hospital actually gives the babies the drugs in very tiny amounts and tries to give them a tiny bit less every day to get them off it. It's really horrible. It's really terrible. So I just wanted to mention that to show on the spiritual side that if you have someone who is acting spiritually properly, they create the lavush. Just like if you act physically properly, you make a physical body for the child that's proper, and the physical body of the child is completely dependent on the body of the parents. If your parents both have brown eyes, you're not going to be born with blue eyes. But that's not only physical, it's also spiritual. That the way the parents act causes the spiritual traits of the child, not changing the soul, changing the lavush. And the lavush is the in-between. The lavush allows the soul's expression into the world. Therefore, it says in the Zohar that every mitzvah that a person does comes through the lavush. And their whole connection to Hashem comes through the lavush. Because the whole way the person interacts with their neshama is by the lavush. Not meaning that lavush is the neshama. Just like you need a healthy body to be able to access your soul. If a person has a broken leg, they're not exactly going to be able to do a mitzvah of running to... What's a mitzvah of running? Help me out.
Mitzvah of what?
Mitzvah involves running places.
Running to yeshiva.
Exactly. You can't run to shul if you're born with defunct legs. So too, it's going to be very difficult for someone to connect to Hashem with love and fear if they're born with a soul that has defunct emotions. Not that there's any problem with their soul. That the lavush, the nefesh hasichlis, the in-between is going to be defunct, and that is going to cause big issues and it's going to cause a lot of trouble of the in-between. So what have we seen from today's discussion? That the soul literally comes from above. It's purely godly, it purely comes from God, no one has any effect on that. But the way it comes into your life, that's affected through the lavush. And that is according to the parents. I want to say a very important story. I heard from a shir of Rabbi Yoel that he said as follows. There was a certain tzaddik who his father was a very simple man. He was a great tzaddik and he was born to a very simple man. And he obviously loved Hashem and feared Hashem and did all the mitzvahs, had a much greater connection to Hashem than I'm ever going to have. But you know what this tzaddik once said? He said, if my father had ever gone to mikveh once in his life before giving birth to me, before conceiving me, I would be a completely different person. I would be so much greater. Because this person saw, it's not about his mother going to mikveh. He was born in a completely kosher way. But if his father had acted in a more spiritual way and gone to mikveh, which he doesn't need to by halacha standards, but going to mikveh for his father would be leveling up his purity and spirituality, that would have made him a completely different person because his lavush, the connection of his body and soul, would have been so much purer and so much edler. Edler in English is demure. So much more pure. Thus, the Alter Rebbe finishes off the Perek to nail in the point that no matter who you are, the soul comes completely from Hashem. And you have the only thing that a person can do is affect the lavush, affect the body, but the soul is completely godly, untouchable, uncontaminatable. Ooh, is that really a word? Incontaminatable is better. You can't contaminate it. The Alter Rebbe says you should know that sometimes a soul of a great tzaddik is born, sometimes the greatest souls are born to the simplest or lowest or most evil even people. Sometimes the greatest souls come to the most evil people. You know why? The Alter Rebbe is going to explain later in Tanya. Some things have such a great soul that the klippos and the spirits of impurity don't let it come into the world. They're like, wow, this guy's going to be such a tzaddik, he's going to knock it out of the park. The world's going to just be, Mashiach's going to come, So then they only let this soul descend to the world to be born to very lowly, impure, criminal people in order to hope that this soul with this upbringing will be a terrible person. And a terrible person with a very holy soul could do a massive amount of damage. But if the person chooses to do the right thing, they can unlock the power of their soul and do great things. So with this, we've proven once again that the soul is purely from above. Problem. You just told me sometimes. The Arizal taught that sometimes low people can have a holy soul. So why only sometimes? If everything's completely from Hashem and you have no impact, then all the time there should be 50-50 chance if this holy person's going to have a holy soul come from them or a criminal's going to have a holy soul from them. Why is it only sometimes? It sounds like the exception to the rule. It sounds like the soul's based on who you are. So to this, the Rebbe explains as follows. That the soul is completely from Hashem, not about you. Hashem usually decides to send a holy soul to a holy person and a more basic soul to a more basic person. But sometimes there's a disconnect. sometimes there's a exception to the rule, like we explained. I want to say one story and share with you guys one video. The story goes as follows. I'm going to say it in a very shorthand version. There's once a Fabrengen when the Alter Rebbe was Rebbe, and his son, the Mittler Rebbe, was there. And there was also a Chassid there who was a very genuine, real person, but he wasn't a tzaddik, he was a regular person, but very real and genuine. He turned around to the Mittler Rebbe, the future Mittler Rebbe, who was a young man then, who was incredible Talmud Chacham and tzaddik. And he said to him, you think you're so great and so amazing? Listen, your father, I'm sure when he conceived you, he went searching in heaven. He's such a great tzaddik. He would have found the most pristine, pure, holy soul and brought it down for his son. My father, I can imagine what he was thinking about when I was conceived. It probably wasn't so holy. And your father, every morning prays at great length and learns Torah with great love for Hashem.